check my phone, refresh one more time, hoping for a like, just a sign I'm alive. But the numbers don't move and the screen's so cold. I'm a pastor with a platform, but my story's untold. I could stir up some drama, take a swing at the fray, or twist some old scriptures in a clickbait way. But deep down I know it's a desperate plea. I just want someone to notice me. Me being awesome, but nobody cares. Throwing my heart out, but it's lost in the air. I'm screaming, look at me, I'm a shining star, but the world scrolls on and I'm falling apart. Oh, me being awesome, fading in the dark. So here's to my stone, skipping over the lake, a fleeting little moment no one bothers to take. Pastor Tommy's still here, but the crowd's moved on. Me being awesome, just a forgotten song.
A los 45 te toca examinar.
Soul, living in a house where he ain't in control. Cassandra's the queen, she's calling the shots, ruling the roost while the rooster just trots. She's loud on the net, stirring up a fuss, ranting about pastors, kicking up dust. A busybody with a tongue so sharp, Tommy just strums on his old guitar. Oh, gently let Mr. Poor old Tommy boy. Cassandra's the boss, he's her favorite toy. She's preaching separation, but divorce ain't right. He's dreaming of spanking her under the moonlight. From the podcast throne, she's the one who sings, while Tommy's just tugging on puppet strings. Gently led mister, with a heart so true. Cassandra's the wildfire he can't subdue. She's got opinions flying left and right, online all day, she's a keyboard knight. Drama's her game, she's stirring the pot. Tommy can't rein in what she's got. Separation's fine, she tells her crowd, but divorce, oh no, that ain't allowed. And when it's time for a baby to plan, Tommy's gotta ask permission from his old man or woman. Oh, gently let Mr. Poor old Tommy boy. Cassandra's the boss, he's her favorite toy. She's preaching separation, but divorce ain't right. He's dreaming of spanking her under the moonlight. From the podcast throne, she's the one who sings, while Tommy's just tugging on puppet strings. Gently led mister, with a heart so true. Cassandra's the wildfire he can't subdue.
Thanks for joining me on the Baptist Bias. It's a special show here in the studio by myself, and I just wanted to make a video about this controversial subject of marital rape. Now, I do want to give a viewer discretion advised, because at the end of the day, this is an adult topic, and it uses even the word rape, which I don't really like to talk about with kids anyways. So just viewer discretion advised. I may even warn that a couple different times. You know, when we talk about this particular subject, it's kind of a crazy subject that feminists have hijacked and really even put it out there as like a real thing, that within the bounds of marriage, you could have, quote, rape. And I'm going to be reading the Wikipedia article on this particular subject, and we're going to talk about it. But, you know, really to destroy this idea, I just thought you just read what Wikipedia says about it, and it's kind of like almost enough said. Now, we'll go to some Bible verses as well too, but it is a stream. If you have any questions or something you want to throw in the chat, you can. I'll be trying to do my best to look at the chat as well. It's Friday. It's the best day. I'm excited about it. So let's go ahead and see if we can pull up this article, Marital Rape. So this is from Wikipedia specifically. This is their article about it. I'm going to see, maybe I can move this. I don't want to get anything cut off. And so I'm going to move that just a hair. There we go. That's probably a little bit better. Okay. So we're looking at marital rape, Wikipedia. It's an actual just web page. And it says here, marital rape or spousal rape is the act of sexual intercourse with one spouse with the spouse's consent. Again, I'm going to be reading this article. It uses adult language. I don't recommend this show for kids just because it's like, at the end of the day, kids just probably don't need to be hearing about this. This is weird anyways. But I do want to address this particular issue and talk about it. So again, viewer discretion advised. It's saying the idea that you can, quote, rape your spouse, and it says without their, quote, consent. That's really what's the definition here of the rape, is without the consent. It says it's usually done to a wife or woman by her husband. Usually. Apparently, this goes both ways. Weird. So the lack of consent is the essential element and does not always involve physical violence. Now, I think this is important because when pastors or preachers have gotten up and said, hey, there's no such thing as rape in marriage, and they're really fighting this feminist idea, they're not addressing this violent issue because obviously violence is a completely different subject. Obviously, the Bible condemns the idea of beating, punching your wife, of just abusing your wife physically and in some kind of a gruesome way. Like anything like that would obviously fall in just violence. That has nothing to do with having sexual relationships with your spouse. Obviously, beating or tying them up or harming or injuring. The Bible has lots of verses that condemn the idea of harming people, physically injuring them. Obviously, any of that kind of stuff is just off the table. And this particular article is not addressing that. It's like, no, we want to talk about the, quote, the consent element. And again, that's usually what this argument is around, is not physical violence, but usually the consent issue. Because notice it says the lack of consent is the essential element. So the essential element is not physical violence here. The essential element is consent. Now, for all of us that have a brain in our head, we believe that consent was given when you said, I do. That's the whole point of marriage. I mean, that's the whole reason why men and women are getting married. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 addresses this and makes it clear that's the reason why men get married, is so they can have a physical relationship with their spouse. And so this is just kind of a weird idea, a modern idea, a feminist idea of this, quote, rape within marriage. Now, it says here, marital rape is considered a form of domestic violence and sexual abuse. Although historically, sexual intercourse within marriage was regarded as a right of spouses, engaging the act without the spouse's consent is now widely classified as rape by many societies around the world and increasingly criminalized. However, it remains unacknowledged by some more conservative cultures. So yeah, again, obviously the conservatives are saying rape within marriage is ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. When you say I do, you consented. And so this modern feminist idea that has even gotten to the point where it's changed the laws in this country is just weird, wicked, makes no sense, and it's just outright feminism. You read this article, it's super clear. Let's keep reading here. It says, hey, some people aren't recognizing it. Yeah, like I'm not recognizing marital rape as a legit thing. Super weird. The issues of sexual and domestic violence within marriage and the family unit, and more specifically the issue of violence against women, have come to growing international attention from the second half of the 20th century. Still, in many countries, marital rape either remains outside the criminal law or is illegal but widely tolerated. Laws are rarely enforced due to factors ranging from reluctance of authorities to pursue the crime to the lack of public knowledge that sexual intercourse in marriage without consent is illegal. So he's saying, even though we've changed the tide, and even though things have been evolving, and even though people are recognizing this, For the most part, many people are not recognizing this as super tolerated. People don't even realize this is illegal because, frankly speaking, who would want to even dream this up? This is bizarre. It's crazy. It's weird. This is just stupidity at an all-time high. Now, I'm going to keep reading here. Marital rape is more widely experienced by women, though not exclusively. So, some guy out there is getting raped by his wife, whatever that means. Marital rape is often a chronic form of violence for the victim, which takes place within abusive relations. It exists in a complex web of state governments, cultural practices, and societal ideologies, which combine to influence each distinct instance and situation in varying ways. The reluctance to define non-consensual sex between married couples as a crime and to prosecute has been attributed to traditional views of marriage, interpretations of religious doctrines, ideas about male and female sexuality, and to cultural expectations of subordination of a wife to her husband. So notice what it's saying. Saying the reason why people would not want to believe in this, quote, marital rape doctrine is, number one, a traditional view of marriage. Number two, having some kind of religious belief. Number three, understanding there's a difference between men and women sexually. Number four is that wives are supposed to submit to their husbands. How could anybody even argue with any of these logics, any of these points, any of these doctrines? This is just self-explanatory. Yeah, obviously, men have the rule over their wives. And obviously the whole point of marriage is to have physical relations. So it just makes absolute no sense to suggest that there's somehow, quote, rape in marriage. Yeah, I agree. This is, these are normal ways to combat this nonsense. It says views which continue to be common in many parts of the world. These views of marriage and sexuality started to be challenged in most Western countries from the 1960s and 70s, especially by second wave feminism, leading to an acknowledgement of the woman's right to self-determination of all matters relating to her body and the withdrawal of the exemption or defense of marital rape. So notice the article itself is saying this is second wave feminism. It's not even first wave. It's second wave. And notice, not until the 1960s and 70s did this even come into the idea of like popular culture or people pushing these ideas. And it's only Western cultures. For any like reasonable Bible believing conservative out there, all of these are just red flags. 60s and 70s, red flag. Second wave feminism, that should be like 5 red flags by itself. The fact that it's about women's right to self-determination, I mean, this is just nonsensical stuff. No one should be adhering to this feminism idea. This is crazy. Now, I'm going to keep reading. We have some questions being poured in. I'm going to address them here in a minute. Article says, most countries criminalized marital rape from the late 20th century onward. Very few legal systems allowed for the prosecution of rape within marriage before the 1970s. So here's the thing. Almost everybody universally agreed, even court systems, countries, laws, lawmakers, just almost everybody is believing that marital rape isn't a thing, isn't possible, doesn't exist prior to the 1970s as far as a criminal element. It says criminalization has occurred through various ways, and this is going to bring up some recent more cases on this. It says including removal of statutory exemptions from the definitions of rape, judicial decisions, explicit legislation reference in statutory law preventing the use of marriage as a defense, or creation of a special offense of marital rape, albeit at a lower level of punishment. In many countries, it is still unclear whether marital rape is covered by the ordinary rape laws, but in some countries, non-consensual sexual relations involving coercion may be prosecuted under general statutes prohibiting violence, such as assault and battery laws. Of course, again, I'm not advocating for assault. I'm not advocating for battery. I'm not advocating for harming and physically damaging your spouse. Obviously, that's foolish nonsense, and any level of escalation is criminalized in pretty much the whole world, and has always been criminalized. They've had assault and battery laws on the books for a long period of time. The rape is a completely different element. It's a separate element. So we can't combine these two things and say that they're the same. So anytime we're talking about marital rape, and anybody saying that I don't believe that exists or that should be criminalized, we're not talking about physical assault. We're not talking about physical harm, because obviously those cross other boundaries. It's a different conversation. So it says, historically, in much of the world, rape was seen as a crime of tort or theft of a man's property, usually either a husband or father. In this case, property damage meant that the crime was not legally recognized as damage against the victim, but instead to her father or husband's property. Therefore, by definition, a husband could not rape his wife. The view that a husband could not be charged with the rape of his wife was described by Sir Matthew Hale, it's around the 1600s, in History of the Pleas of the Crown, published posthumously in 1736, where he wrote that the husband cannot be guilty of a rape committed by himself upon his lawful wife, for by their mutual consent and contract, the wife hath given up herself in this kind unto her husband, which she cannot retract. So he's saying when you got married, you gave consent and you can't give it back. Also, American and English law subscribed until the 20th century to the system of coverture. That is a legal doctrine under which, upon marriage, a woman's legal rights were subsumed by those of her husband. The implication was that once unified by marriage, a spouse could no longer be charged with raping one's spouse any more than could be charged with raping oneself. So it's essentially saying that, hey, once you become one flesh, some things are different. You can't harm yourself in that way. And so it's not a harmful thing. In the sense that also the argument being brought up that in the Bible, if you took someone's virginity, you'd have to pay the dowry to the father. Obviously, we're not talking about adultery or those kind of things. You know, when it comes to someone else's wife, obviously adultery, you're violating his property and his rights, and you're violating the father's rights and his dowry. So obviously those things were similar, and of course those would be crimes. There's a difference between things that are a good idea and things that are crimes. And so this is the legal justification for a crime. And so we have to basically describe, what is really a crime. And it's just saying you just can't criminally be prosecuted for, quote, raping your wife, even if it's not a good idea. It's just saying even if someone did something stupid, it's not a crime. Now, it says many jurisdictions, including all 50 United States, had criminalized marital rape by the 1990s. So I guess every American before 1990s that did not believe in this was crazy, weird, psychotic. I mean, praise God for the 1990s and second wave feminism to go ahead and correct all of us on this really important issue, right? It says English common law also had a great impact on many legal systems of the world through colonization. Here's some more. This article is just funny to me. It says Kirsty Yellow, I don't know how to say this name, states in the prologue of Understanding Marital Rape in a Global Context, quote, in some cultures, consent is not even something that an individual wife can give. The families that arrange the marriage guarantee her permanent consent. Control over a wife's sexuality was only a part of the greater control that men had in all other areas concerning her. A husband's control over his wife's body could also be seen in the way of adultery between a wife and another man was constructed. For example, in 1707, English Lord Chief Justice John Holt described the act of a man having sexual relations with another man's wife as, quote, the highest invasion of property. For this reason, in many cultures, there was a conflation between the crimes of rape and adultery, since both were seen and understood as a violation of the rights of the husband. Spousal rape was considered a property crime against a husband, not against a woman's right to self-determination. So I'm gonna put that on the screen here. Notice again, it's saying like arranged marriages. This isn't even possible. You have an arranged marriage. You know, it's not even the wife's consent. It's like the family's consent. Now, again, I'm not pro arranged marriages. Like, that's not how I want to do it. But historically, that happened. And there would be a huge issue if you have this arranged marriage and then the husband doesn't have relations to his wife. He's paying for it. He's marrying her. It's just how it works. It's just how things make sense. Let's keep reading. It says the property to be withheld in a female was her virginity. This was the commodity. Following this line of logic, a woman was and still is in many cultures across the globe first the property of her father, then upon marriage the property of her husband. Therefore, a man could not be prosecuted for raping his own wife because she was his possession. However, if another man raped someone else's wife, this was essentially stealing property. It says English customs, bride capture was thought to be stealing a father's property by raping his daughter. Therefore, rape laws were created to protect the property interests men had in their women, not to protect women themselves. So just saying most laws were about adultery and outside of marriage. It says in some cultures, marriage is arranged for the purpose of creating access to procreation. In these situations, the parties do not necessarily consent to marriage. Following this logic, if consent is not part of marriage, then it is not necessary for intercourse. And it says the autonomy of the wife is also often compromised in cultures where bride price is paid. Under customary law in certain parts of Africa, forced sex in marriage was not prohibited, although some specific circumstances, such as during advanced pregnancy, immediately after childbirth, during menstruation, or during mourning for a deceased close relative, were recognized as giving the wife the right to refuse sex. So just saying that you don't have a right to say no, except for in just obvious health situations, obvious just some reason that would make clear sense, saying that would be the only exceptions. It says here, rape has been, until recent decades, understood as a crime against honor and reputation, not only in domestic legislation, but also in international law. For example, according to the Article 27 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, women shall be especially protected against any attack on their honor, in particular against rape, enforced prostitution, or any form of indecent assault. It was not until the 1990s that the International Criminal Court statute recognized crimes of sexual violence as violent crimes against the person. Not until the last half century was rape understood to be an offense against the woman, against her dignity, instead of against her family's or her husband's honor. So it's now like trying to say, well, we try to change the law to say like rape is more of a personalized offense as opposed to the property argument. Again, this is not really addressing the marriage aspect, but legal aspects. So we're moving into another section. Historically, many cultures have had a concept of spouses' conjugal rights to sexual intercourse with each other. This can be seen in English common law in force in Anglo-America and the British Commonwealth, where the very concept of marital rape was treated as an impossibility. Right. So the British Commonwealth, just Christians for hundreds of years, everybody said this is impossible. So it's crazy how some people get up and they'll preach and they'll scream about how everybody's weird and evil and wicked for believing this. But it's like, okay, so you're just saying everybody in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, all of these Christians, all of our founding fathers, all of these people that are writing laws based on the Bible, they're just all wicked and evil and just can't see these obvious, clear understandings of second wave feminism that you have. I mean, you got to think about this. In this, it says, again, that Sir Matthew Hale had said in the Historia Placatorium Coronae, or History of the Pleas of the Crown, where he wrote that, quote, the husband cannot be guilty of a rape committed by himself upon his lawful wife, for by their mutual consent and contract, the wife hath given up herself in his kind under her husband, which she cannot retract. I think I read a similar quote earlier, maybe in the exact same quote previously in this article, so it repeats it again. Formalization of the marital rape exemption law. So it's talking about how laws have evolved and changed. And Sir Matthew Hale's statement in the History of Pleas of the Crown did not cite a legal precedent for it, though it relied on earlier standards. In the case of Lord Audley's, so this is in like the late 1500s, 1600s, it says, for instance, Hale cites this jurist Bracton, supported this rule said to have derived from laws of King, and then it gives Athelstan, whereupon the law holds that even were the party of no chaste life but a whore, yet there may be ravishment, but it is a good plea to say she was his concubine. So these are like just appealing to old laws. A lawful marriage legitimizes the conjugal act itself, so, quote, marital rape is a contradiction in terms. This is just historically, they're saying this is impossible. Historically, they're saying this is a contradiction in terms that can't even exist. It doesn't even make sense. It says, while a physical assault against a spouse may be charged, such is distinct from the delegitimization of conjugal union itself as rape. So it's saying the laws were making clear distinction between, quote, what we're calling rape, which is not real, and physical violence. Physical violence is a completely separate act, could be punished. Rape, it can't be punished because it's a contradiction in terms. It says marriage then should not be defined as, quote, an exemption to rape, but as contradictory to it. So according to Wikipedia, it's saying historically lawmakers and lawyers and people that wrote our laws were saying there's not an exemption for rape. It's not an exception. It's not an exemption. It's contradictory. It's so stupid. It's so foolish to think that this could even exist. Marriage created conjugal rights between spouses, and marriage could not be annulled except by a private act of parliament. It therefore follows that a spouse could not revoke conjugal rights from the marriage, and therefore there could be no rape between spouses. The principle is repeated in East Treatise of the Pleas of the Crown in 1803 and in Archibald's pleading and evidence in criminal cases in 1822. The principle is framed as an exemption to the law of rape in an English courtroom in R versus Clarence, but it was not overturned until 1991 by the House of Lords in the case of RVR in 1991, where it was described as an anachronistic and offensive legal fiction. Sorry, I'm having a tough time reading some of those words. But what it's saying is that there was a legal precedent that you could never rape your spouse. It's contradictory until 1991 in the UK. And it's saying then that's when it's being overturned legally. So again, for the first 1900 years of the New Testament, this has been, and again, we go well past this, if we go back to the Old Testament, of course, just from the beginning of time to now, everyone's had the same opinion. And it's just praise God for the last 30 years, right? I think this is the problem with Gen Z, and is that they've grown up in such a weird feminized culture that they don't understand that things have changed dramatically. Like homosexuality used to be illegal. Marital rape used to not even be a thing. Like all of these feminist ideas, all these liberal ideas are just like brand new. And so they've grown up in that, so they don't know any different. But for a lot of us and a lot of sane people, we're just thinking like, where in the world did this even come from? We didn't even know about it. It's crazy. Feminist critique in the 19th century. So it says, from the beginnings of the 19th century feminist movement, activists challenged the presumed right of men to engage in forced or coerced sex with their wives. It says, in the United States, the 19th century women's rights movement fought against the husband's right to control marital intercourse in a campaign that was remarkably developed, prolific, and insistent, giving 19th century taboos against the public mention of sex or sexuality. Suffragists, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucy Stone, singled out a woman's right to control marital intercourse as the core component of equality. So some of the most important, rights that women's rights were trying to advocate for, that these early stages of feminism were going for, were control over marital intercourse within marriage. And so this is a major component to feminism. You cannot extract these ideas from feminism. This is feminism at its core. It's saying this is like one of the most important core components of feminism. These are what they were arguing for. So if someone says like, oh, I'm not a feminist, but I, think this marital rape doctrine is legit, that's contradictory. You cannot separate these two ideas. You have to at least admit, no, I believe in second wave feminism. If you're going to believe in this marital rape nonsense, then you have to say, I'm at least second wave feminism, probably third and fourth, honestly. But I mean, at the very minimum, you're first and second wave. Saying your 19th century feminist demands centered on the right of women to control their bodies and fertility. Sounds familiar. Pro-abortion, right? Position consent in marital sexual relations as an alternative to contraception and abortion, which many opposed, and also embraced eugenic concerns about excessive procreation. So think about it. These women they don't they want to turn off the sex because they don't want to have kids. And again, if you're listening for the first time, you just joined in, parental advisement warning. I think that only adults should be probably listening to this conversation. We're using, the language of this article, and we're being really explicit in these talking points. But it's basically saying women want to stop having sex with their husbands so they'd stop procreating. And it's why? So they can just not have kids because they hate kids because they're satanic. Feminists are satanic. The Bible literally commands the woman to marry, bear children, and guide the house. Like, that's just textbook Bible. And it's saying the women that don't want to get married, bear children, and guide the house, that they've gone after Satan. They turn aside after Satan, is what the Bible says. Like, it can't even be clearer that this is a satanic doctrine to want these things to happen. It's saying here, British liberal feminists John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor attacked marital rape as a gross double standard in law and as central to the subordination of women. So they're saying, oh man, we got to get rid of this subordination of women doctrine, which is what? Oh yeah, the Bible. Advocates of the free love movement, including early anarcho-feminists such as Valentine de Clary, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce these names, and Emma Goldman, as well as Victoria Woodhull, Thomas Lowe Nichols, and Mary Gove Nichols, joined a critique of marital rape to advocate women's autonomy and sexual pleasure. Moses Harmon, a Kansas-based publisher and advocate for women's rights, was jailed twice under the Comstock laws for publishing articles by a woman who was victimized and a doctor who treated marital rape survivors decrying marital rape. So this was even funnier. It's like people that were trying to advocate for this position, trying to advocate for marital rape, were put in jail just for talking about it. Can you imagine? I mean, preachers today are preaching sermons, and if they had preached this sermon in the past, they would have been put in jail for decrying marital rape. They would have been jailed. They would have been put in prison for what they're doing. So again, time's not always on your side. Look, when your doctrine doesn't fit time and understanding history and understanding conservative ideas, like, you probably have the wrong idea, probably have the wrong doctrine. If all the people that built our nation and conservative Christians would have jailed you for your view, maybe you're on the wrong side of this issue. This is what's so funny about this article. They're using this as like somehow to appeal to, like, they're such great heroes of this movement. And I'm thinking, like, what idiots. They're being put in prison for trying to say, oh man, marital rape. De Clary defended Harmon in a well-known article, Sex Slavery. She refused to draw any distinction between rape outside of and within marriage. What in the world? Did you hear that? Let me read this again. She refused to draw any distinction between rape outside of and within marriage. Anybody that thinks that rape is the same within and with outside marriage is a delusional lunatic. It says, quote, and that is rape, where a man forces himself sexually upon a woman, whether he's licensed by the marriage law to do it or not. So again, she's just saying anytime a man tries to have relations with his wife and she's just not interested or whatever, then it's rape. British philosopher and writer Bertrand Russell, in his book Marriage and Morals, deplored the situation of married women. He wrote, quote, marriage is for woman the commonest mode of livelihood, and the total amount of undesired sex endured by women is probably greater in marriage than in prostitution. So this guy in the 1920s writes some book claiming that women having, undesired sex now, just undesired, like they just weren't that interested, they didn't feel it, whatever, is happening at just extreme rates. And it's far worse than prostitution itself. It's like these people don't even have problems with prostitution. It seems like they don't even care. It's just like, this is silly. This is this crazy 20th and 21st century criminalization. Put a W in the chat if you're enjoying this conversation. I'm going to keep going for a little bit longer. Put an L if you're hating it. And there was questions earlier in the chat. I might address it now just in case it goes away. I don't know if questions can go away. Question is, do you think it's okay for a husband to force himself on his wife if she physically resists him? I think we have to ask this question, what do we really mean by these things? Obviously, I've said repeatedly, I don't think physical assault is ever okay. So if there's any kind of violence, then I would say no. Okay. when it says force himself on his wife if she physically resists him, is it okay? Are we saying, is it okay criminally, or is it okay as like, is it a good idea? I think there's different layers here. Number one, if there's violence, I'm saying I don't agree with it. Number two, if we're talking about, is this a crime? I would say it's not a crime, period. It's just not a crime. It's contradiction. It's a contradiction of terms. Number three, is it okay? This would be like, is it a good idea? I would say, like, in most cases, it's probably not necessary. It's not something that should ever really take place. But obviously, in extreme scenarios, if a wife has been married to her husband for months and years and there's just no sex whatsoever, and, the relationship's just a total train wreck, and a guy happens to just, I guess just make it happen without violence, I can't condemn that. Now, again, I think that for most people, that's not even a scenario. It's funny. We have to talk about these extremely hypotheticals. Typically when people are preaching against this idea or talking about this idea, they're trying to say, well, I just think that someone just going and savagely beating their wife and chaining her to the wall and torturing her is just crazy. It's like, yeah, everybody does. Everybody thinks that Ted Bundy's a serial killer. It's like nobody wants to dream up these serial killer, psycho thriller moments that you've dreamed up and then put a rubber stamp of approval on it. But when we're talking about marital rape, we're talking about what this article is actually saying. And this article is differentiating from violence and just sex and marriage. And that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against second wave feminism. We're fighting against these ideas and lies that are coming from communists, Satanists, women that don't want to procreate. This is why it's so important. I think I addressed that question. If you feel like there's a follow-up, you can put it in there. If permissible, is it advisable or wise? Again, when it comes to criminality, it's not illegal. It should never be illegal. Obviously, some stupid courts have changed the laws, but that's ridiculous. That should never be the law. Is it advisable? Again, to me, it's one of those things that's discretion. If a husband has gone a super long time, we're talking about months, a year, and he just makes it happen, I'm not going to condemn the guy, at the end of the day. Obviously, if you're having regular relations with your wife, you probably should not ever go down this road. If you're just because you want to have, just because you want to eat 5 meals a day and you're getting 3, it's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't force the issue to 5. Okay, that's weird. Okay, I don't think anybody's really advocating for that either, right? But someone that's having regular relationship with their spouse doesn't need to force the issue beyond what, getting regular attention. I don't think you should be extra selfish, right? At the end of the day. But men have needs, women have needs. And if they have this need, it's not my right to say no to my wife. It's not her right to say no to me. We're going to satisfy each other's needs. If my wife says, hey, I want to scratch my back, I just scratch her back. I don't refuse it. If my wife's like, hey, rub my feet, I just rub her feet. Sometimes I'm rubbing her back and it's like, now rub my feet. It's like, okay, I'll rub your feet. This is how a healthy marriage should be. It's just like, hey, do this. And it's like, I'm not sitting here just like, man, I just really want to rub her feet. Man, I just really want to rub her back. It's just how life works. In a healthy marriage, it's just like your wife just says, scratch my back, and you scratch it. You tell your wife, hey, rub my shoulders. She rubs your shoulders. Hey, hold man. Also in marriage, I'm never asking for consent when I kiss my wife. I just walk up and kiss my wife. I just walk up and smack her on the ass. You know what I mean? Oh man, I can't believe you said that. Well, the show's not for kids, okay? So I already said that. But at the end of the day, it's just like, hey, I just walk up, hug my wife. I just kiss my wife. Obviously, outside of marriage, this would be inappropriate for a man to just touch women like this. A man that's not married to another woman or another man's wife, you're not going to go up and just kiss her, touch her on her bottom, give her a hug, like in a kind of a sexual way. Obviously, there's a grandma hug. Obviously, there's a family hug. Obviously, there's a friend hug. I'm saying, like, you're not going to get up there and just pull her in tight in some romantic way, face to face. Like, just that's not appropriate. That wouldn't be tolerated. People would even consider that sexual assault if you're touching her in certain places that only a husband should get to touch. So again, but in marriage, I'm like, honey, can I kiss you? Honey, can I give you a hug? Honey, no, I just hug her. No, I just kiss her. Nope, it just happens. And so that's just a healthy marriage. That's what makes sense. I'm trying to just catch up on the chat here and see what else. Anchor Baptist Church, words have meaning. This is absolutely feminism. Agree with that. Sanderson 1611, make her do it. I don't know what that was a response to, but I'm assuming I agree. Ben the Baptist, KJV, consent happened when she said I do. Amen to that. JC Neville, women know it gives them authority in a marriage as soon as society says their husbands do not have a right to relations. Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree. They don't get authority, but they're kind of given this fake sense of authority. And, you know, that's just, it's a wicked attitude. Itaki says this is one of the reasons never to marry an unsaved woman. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but that I agree. You should not get married to someone that's not saved. A lot of W's in the chat. I got a double U, so I think that means that we're doing a great job. You know, that's how I understand it. Some other questions. Someone's seething about this episode apparently out there. Would it be wrong for a husband to refuse relations as a disciplinary measure would only be effective for a, quote, driven wife? Would it be wrong for a husband to refuse relations as a... Yeah, I think that's like Islam. Islam says, like, you know, forsake her in bed. I think that, you know, you cannot discipline your wife by stop having sex with her. That's silly. That should never happen. I think that, you know, disciplinary action should be nothing that's a duty of marriage. Like, you're not going to stop feeding each other. You're not going to stop paying bills. You're not going to stop having sex. Like, all of that is wrong to stop doing. But obviously, as a husband, I think, you know, if you say, hey, I'm going to limit your credit card, take away your phone, you know, other disciplinary actions, I think husbands have the right to do as they see fit in their relationship. So, you know, that would be a silly idea. And let's be honest, most of the time men aren't punishing women. That way it's the opposite. Women are punishing their husbands by not having sex with them. And it's wicked. It's evil. It's wrong. And again, you know, it should be something that should be resolved immediately. You know, as my wife and I always talk about it, he said, hey, if you have problems in marriage, you probably need to have more sex, not less. More sex will help your marriage, will heal your marriage, will make you draw closer to one another. You know, anytime there's a lull, you need to just get back on the horse. And, you know, sometimes for both parties, the first time back, if it's been a little while, it's been a week, it's been longer, it's been weeks, you know, you need to just get back in there and just get back on the program. And, you know, for men and women, they're a little bit different. Sometimes women just need to get back in that mindset, and they just kind of need a few times to basically get warmed up to it, and then they're back into the program. So, you know, revving the engine isn't going to harm anything. You need to get out there and just make it happen. Of course, if you're listening to the stream today and you're married and you have a great marriage, you know, you should probably have sex today. That's just my personal opinion. That's my personal advice. No such thing as marital rape. It's a disgusting idea of feminism. I'm going to go back. I don't know how much more. I got to end this show at some point. It's been a good show so far, I think, but let's just keep reading this article a little bit more. 20th and 21st century criminalization. The marital rape exemption or defense became more widely viewed as inconsistent with the developing concepts of human rights and equality. The first country which criminalized the marital rape was 1922, was the Soviet Union. Now, I'm just going to pause for a second. As soon as I read that, I was like, oh, you mean the Bolshevik Revolution? You mean communist Russia? You mean the Jews? One of the first places to criminalize marital rape is the Jews, is communism, is Soviet Russia, is the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, that should be like every red flag you could possibly need. It's like, how can anybody read the history of this stuff, read this and think this is good? This is obviously satanic, evil, wicked, nonsensical. Now, what's funny is if we read the clarification on this, it says, i.e. the penal code made no longer the distinction between violent sex within marriage and outside of marriage. So this is what's so funny. Even though they're the first to do it, they still are only clarifying between violent sex and just sex within marriage. So if you didn't actually physically harm her, if you didn't actually beat her up and bruise her and cause some kind of a, torture element here, then it was still legal in communist Russia with the Jews. They're just simply saying you can't violently have sex between husband and wife. Which again, I'm saying I don't really think that makes sense either. It says 1 decade later, Poland, 1932, after World War II, many members of communist bloc followed the Soviet example. Another country did it. Communists. What a great idea. Yeah, I'm a literal communist. I'm a literal feminist. I mean, that's what you have to say when you say I support this marital rape idea, this marital rape doctrine. It's a contradictory term. Stop using it. It doesn't even make sense. It can't happen. You can't rob yourself. Okay, I can't take money out of my bank account, and that's thievery. Officer, I need to report a crime. I took money out of my own bank account. They would be like, well, we might arrest you for being an idiot, but we can't arrest you for for being a criminal because, you didn't steal money. You're not a thief. You didn't thieve yourself. You didn't rob yourself. You're not a robber. It's crazy. This stuff is just crazy. Under the influence of European countries in which marital rape was already illegal, feminists in other countries worked systematically since the 1960s to overturn the marital rape exemption and criminalize marital rape. So again, I didn't write this article. Feminists are doing this. Increasing criminalization of spousal rape is part of a worldwide reclassification of sexual crimes, quote, from offenses against morality, the family, good customs, honor, and chastity, to offenses against liberty, self-determination, or physical integrity. It's a human rights violation according to 1993's Human Rights Commission. Who wants to believe in this stuff? This is just crazy. In 2012, High Commissioner of Human Rights Navi Pillay stated that, quote, violations of women's human rights are often linked to their sexuality and reproductive role. In many countries, married women may not refuse to have sexual relations with their husbands and often have no say in whether they use contraception. Ensuring that women have full autonomy over their bodies is the first crucial step towards achieving substantive equality between women and men. Personal issues such as when, how, and with whom they choose to have sex, and when, how, and with whom they choose to have children are at the heart of living a life in dignity. Now, again, I've preached against this repeatedly. I preached the whole sermon years ago saying that I don't ask my wife's permission to have children. I heard a pastor, Pastor Tommy McMurtry, preach that years ago. He preached that, he had to get his wife's permission in order to have more kids. And again, bad idea. I know someone very close to me, very personal, doesn't go to church at my church or anything like that. Has nothing to do with church, where the husband wants more kids and the wife said no. And then he got snipped. Then he got a vasectomy. In fact, pretty much everybody that I knew growing up got a vasectomy. And I remember them talking to me about this, and I said, I will never get a vasectomy. That's disgusting and gross and wicked and evil. I don't want that. Stay away from me. And then I was treated like a villain. I was treated like an evil person. They said, well, if you don't get a vasectomy, then you're going to force your wife to get her tubes tied, and that's a more dangerous procedure, and it costs more money, and that's selfish. And I said, well, I'm not getting that either. And then it was like even more shock and horror. It was just like, what in the world? You're saying that you're just going to keep having kids? Yeah, I'm just going to keep having kids. Sorry you don't like what the Bible says. Sorry that you don't like be fruitful and multiply, as the Bible clearly teaches. I like that. The Bible says that, childbearing is going to keep women saved from the corruption of this world, from lies, from the devil. The women marrying, bearing children, guiding the house, they're going to be kept from the deception of the devil. I don't want a vasectomy. And again, I know men that have gotten vasectomies and they weren't really necessarily trying to do something stupid. And they came to me and they said, should I get a reversal? I said, look, if the damage is done, if you want to get a reversal, go for it. If you don't, you already made that choice. I don't think you're like sinning worse or something like that by not getting it changed. But I'm not going to sit here and excuse it and say it was cool. It was a bad idea. like getting a tattoo. I don't recommend people removing their tattoos. Bad idea. I'm going to preach against it. Vasectomies, same category. You could keep reading this article. I don't know. There's probably even more stuff, and this is pretty funny. I'm going to go to a few Bible verses. I'm going to try and land the plane. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter number 7, it says, "Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband." So notice, according to the text, according to the Bible, you owe something to your spouse, due benevolence. This is not something that is optional. It's something that's commanded. It says here, and it works both ways. I owe my wife benevolence. She owes me benevolence. This is how marriage works. This is how our relationship works. So whenever I want it, I get it. Whenever she wants it, she gets it. It's my wife's body, but it's my choice. And at the end of the day, my body is her body, and it's her choice. You know, in the sense that whatever she rub your back, rub your back, rub your feet, rub your feet. Sex, sex. That's just how it works. You want that, you get it. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. That's exactly what the text says. It says, hey, she says, hey, I want this. Okay, you have to do it. Vice versa. Verse 5, defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. Now, again, the word consent is brought up in this passage, but you have to understand what it's saying. It's not saying that I have to ask permission to have relationships with my wife. It's saying I have to ask permission to not have sex with my wife. So think about this. If I say, honey, I don't want to have sex, and she says no, I have to. That's what the text is actually saying. It's saying I have to get her to agree for me to not have sex with her, or vice versa. If my wife wants to not have sex, she has to come to me and say, can we not have sex tonight, or for this reason, for fasting or prayer or whatever. And if I said, no, I don't agree to that. We're not going to fast or pray tonight. Tonight's Friday night. We're going to have fun. Then you have to. It says, come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. Incontinency meaning like your lack of self-restraint. So if someone's incontinent, usually it's talking about they use the bathroom without being able to hold it. But it could be used in this context of, hey, if you're not having physical relationship, if you're not having sex with your spouse, well, then you may be tempted to sin in this area. And so, you need to just go ahead and come together. Now think about this logic for a second. It's saying if you don't have sex, you're going to be tempted to sin. The feminists and the liberals, how they're reading this? You're tempted to sin by just forcing your wife, right? but then you'd be having sex with her, so then it's contradictory. Verse 5 proves beyond a shadow of a doubt we can't believe in marital rape, because if marital rape was the sin, then you're doing what it's saying. You're coming together. You can't come together and then it's saying you're not coming together. Like, the whole point is that you are coming together. So it's like, if you're not coming together, then you could be tempted for your incontinency. But it's not like, oh man, we got to really warn people about not having enough sex, because then they might be tempted to just attack their spouse in bed or something. I guess when my grandma dies and I'm sad and my wife, quote, attacks me in bed, it's like, bring it on, for number one. Number two, I'm not going to go cry about it or anything like that. It's not going to harm me. Plus, it's just kind of silly to think that men over here are just like so afraid of being like raped by their wife or something like this. Makes no sense. Obviously it's kind of an issue leaning on the other side, but I mean, this is just crazy. And this is what the text says. Now, here's the thing. There's things that the Bible didn't bring up in this issue. Did it bring up the criminal aspect? No. Why? Because it's not a crime. It's just not a crime. If it was a crime, it would be brought up in the Bible. If it's super evil and wicked, chapter and verse. Now, again, is everything expedient? The Bible says that men are allowed to spit in their daughter's face. And I cannot just go around and spit in a stranger's face. That would be considered assault. So there's a different rule for my daughter than there would be for a stranger. So there could be different rules in my own household of how I do things. Now, would it be a good idea if I just constantly just spitting in my daughter's face? Especially if it's not for something grievous, it's not for something that makes sense. No, and someone getting up and saying, hey, there could be a justification to spit in your daughter's face in something really extreme. You know, she's just a whore, or she just does something really disrespectful that you just literally spit in her face and she's ashamed. But obviously we're not talking like just every day, any little grievance. That's where the discretion comes into play, right? So we're talking these situations. It's like, well, if a husband or wife is having normal relations, this conversation doesn't even make sense. We're talking about, more extreme situations. But again, it's out there that women now have been empowered by feminism, and they think as long as, they have a headache, they don't feel good, they're not that interested, they don't feel romantic, there wasn't enough romance today, then they can just say no in the bedroom. And you know what? That's wrong. It's wrong. It's wicked. It shouldn't be happening. We need to defeat this mindset. We need men and women to just say, hey, I'm yours. Whatever you want. We need to take the Chick-fil-A approach. It is my pleasure. Just whatever. The customer is always right. It's funny how just the secular world applies these concepts. We need to apply them into marriage. And so, again, this is a great verse. There's other verses we could look at. Honestly, if you haven't figured it out at this point, there's probably not any help for you. I just think it's funny to read this article. I hope you enjoyed this video. Obviously, it's a little crass. Obviously, it's a little adult topic. But, we need to talk about this. And, husbands and wives need to have more sex, not less. Wives and husbands need to never use this as a weapon. Husbands and wives need to make sure that if their spouse wants it, they get it. If someone was in these really weird extreme situations of 6 months, a year of going without, if it's been even, and I'm just using those numbers. I'm not saying it's limited to that, but I'm just using some numbers. I'm not going to condemn people to just make it happen. Obviously, we should never physically harm our wife. We should never physically harm our husband. You should never physically harm your spouse. I'm not saying that. But if you still believe in this marital rape doctrine, wear the feminist label proudly. Wear the communist label proudly, because there is no way to separate these ideas. They are these ideas. That's where they came from. Stop thinking that you're different. Oh, well, I'm not saying like I'm like these feminists. You are. You really, really are. Okay. And in fact, by what you believe in or saying, you would have been punished. You would have been criminalized. You would have put in jail for those beliefs and those views. We need marriage. We need to make marriages great again. And you know what? That's going to happen through more intimacy, more sex, more procreation, more children. That's what the Bible says. Marry, bear children, guide the house. That's going to have a happy house, a happy life. Why are the feminists so miserable? Because they don't have a loving husband and they're not having lots of sex with their husband. That's why. That's why they're so mad. That's why they're so upset. And because they aren't having that, they don't want anybody else to have it. It's like the devil. He just wants to drag as many people down with them as possible. Itaki 412 says, quote, I'm a based feminist. I don't know what that means. Hopefully that was in jest. If you have another comment or question, put it in now, because I'm about to land the plane. I'm against this marital rape idea. It's contradiction of terms. Doesn't make sense. Read the article. It's hilarious. It's second wave feminism. It's communism. Ben the Baptist says, husbands don't have to, quote, earn physicality with their wife. It is owed. In modern 50-50 marriages is like a reward the husband gets if he was a good little pet for the day. Disgusting nonsense. I agree. Some people say like, oh, this is like Islam. Islam is telling you to forsake your wife in bed. Islam is not Christianity. People try to act like Islam's based or something, or is like conservative. It's not. The Bible is conservative. The Bible is based. Itaki says, yes, I put that in quotes because people say stuff like that. I've never heard that. I would laugh at you. If I was around somebody and they said, I'm a based feminist, I would just laugh and think, I would never take that person seriously. So it just makes no sense. Samuel Foe, Islamic women I've talked to are very feminist. Yeah, probably. Especially the ones in America. America feminizes everyone, no matter what religion, no matter what group, no matter what ethnicity. So thanks for tuning in. Special stream. I hope you liked it. If you liked it, do me a favor and put a comment on the show, not in the chat, but just a comment on the video. Tell me that you liked it. Tell me if you want more content like this. Just kind of a solo show. Last time I did it, I didn't think I was as high energy. Tried to be a little bit more high energy this time. Trying to interact with the audience here. Maybe we can make some improvements, but thanks guys for tuning in. God bless you. And look, if you're married, have sex. Have sex. Don't feel guilty about it. And look, sometimes you do things in marriage that you weren't that into, and just do it, right? You just do the chore, you just do the dishes, you just rub the foot, you just rub the back. This is life, okay? And sometimes you just, Leah shows up and she's like, I borrowed you for the night, and you're just like, let's go. If grandma dies, it's just like, let's go. Don't be a feminist, don't be a communist. You know what? Get the Baptist bias.